Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Happy New Year, everybody. Hopefully you guys had a really good New Year's Eve. You were responsible. You didn't do anything crazy, but managed to find some way to be happy in the midst of all this chaos and madness. But we are picking up with Tales from the Dark Multiverse, Dark Knight's Metal. Now, this is the original Dark Knight's Metal, right? So not what's going on right now with Dark Knight's Death Metal. This is the original metal event that's taking place. And here's an important thing to understand. This is a cool concept. Tales from the Dark Multiverse, as we know, has always been designed to highlight essentially like worlds in the Dark Multiverse. Right? It's like a series of what if stories from, each of these individual universes, right? These individual worlds and how things played out on those worlds. So something that I do want to clear up here with regards to a little bit of confusion, these are not really what ifs, right? It's not like what if in the Dark Multiverse where Batman became an evil version of the Flash, that he instead became like an evil version of Green Arrow or something like that. That's not really what it is, right? It's just in the Dark Multiverse, there is this world where things happen, right? That's basically how this whole thing plays out. And that's why this particular story is actually designed to answer the question, why haven't we really seen anything regarding the Dark Multiverse in DC Comics, right? Why is it that since Dark Knight's Metal started, we haven't really seen anybody reference the Dark Multiverse or travel there or anything along those lines, right? What's going on in that place? And so this gives us the answer, right? Now, an important distinction to understand here is that initially when we saw the original Dark Knight's Metal event, that at the end of that story, we saw the superheroes donning what was in effect, Metal X, more or less, right? Kind of like this metal that was used that could defeat Barbados. And it worked, right? It basically ended up taking him out, right? It ended up pushing the Dark Multiverse back to where it was supposed to be. And the positive multiverse, lived happily ever after until like the next event, the next crisis. What this question answers is in this situation that there is a world out there where the events of Dark Knight's Metal took place. And what it led to was the whole idea of this Metal X effectively being a trap, that instead of it being a kind of metal that could be used by the superheroes to defeat Barbados, instead what ended up happening is it was a trap set by Barbados. And what it did is that as soon as the armor was donned by Batman, it basically allowed Barbados to overtake these guys, right? To immediately subjugate and overtake these guys, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, and then turn them into giant dragons, right? It was basically the last step here. And that once that was done, once Batman was basically taken over by Barbados, it in turn allowed him to completely enter reality, to move away from the realm he was in and to totally take over everything. Now, this is where things get kind of hairy and a little wild, because this is where the Dark Multiverse starts to deteriorate. As soon as this actual process of conquering happens, then in turn, it leads to what's called the death wave. And the death wave is kind of given to us in a couple different forms, right? This idea that like maybe it's just the influence of Barbados as he travels from one world to the next and like wipes out all life on those worlds. But the truth is that the death wave is literally the death of the Dark Multiverse. So it's like, if you guys remember the incursions from Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, imagine that except the Dark Multiverse, right? Like literally whole realities are being destroyed. It's basically what it is here. And so that's why for the most part, at least once we get to the end of this, we'll see there's a pretty significant concept that DC introduces here, right? But there is one individual who's trying to do what he can to save what other worlds are left, right? And he's jumping from Earth 3 in the Dark Multiverse, like the Crime Syndicate, to Fawcett City on Earth S, or maybe it's Earth 5. It used to be Earth S back before the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. But you've got Neo Gotham, so essentially, Batman Beyond in the Dark Multiverse. Like, it's kind of funny because there's a lot of these characters that we just haven't really seen before that we do want to see, right? Like, I want to see a Dark Multiverse version of Batman Beyond. Like, I want to see that, right? Give me a multiverse version of like Terry McGinnis, right? I want to see that guy. I think it'd be amazing. But each one of these worlds that he's running through are worlds that are basically being eradicated, right? They're being destroyed, and the universes themselves are dying because of the death wave. And ultimately, this guy ends up traveling back to the main DC universe, or at least to the main DC Dark Multiverse world, right? Because this whole story takes place in the Dark Multiverse. He ends up traveling back to Dark Multiverse Prime, we can call it Dark Universe Prime. And ultimately, we end up finding out this guy is the Dark Multiverse version of Signal. Here's an important thing that I want to explain here, right? Because this first little tidbit may have thrown you off with regards to like other worlds and things like that. So the idea is that, in order to think about this effectively, think about the positive multiverse as an upside down pyramid. That you've got the point, the very top point at the bottom, and then you've got the wide side at the very end. Now imagine that like below that you have an upside down triangle. Now the point, the very sharp tip there is basically the positive matter multiverse, Earth Zero is what it is. When you have Earth Zero in the negative multiverse or the dark multiverse, that very top point, that's Earth Zero, right? That's how that works. Just kind of give you guys perspective. So it's the opposite, the direct opposite of the main DC universe, right? That's kind of what Earth negative zero is. Well, it doesn't, I don't know if you can really have -0, but you guys understand, right? That's kind of what that is, right? And so the result of this is that what we end up finding out here is that, of course, Duke Thomas, as we know, has the power to see into the past, and as soon as he arrives back here, he's immediately set upon by Barbados and the forces of the dragons, right? Like, you know, Wonder Woman and Superman and Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, and Aquaman. Now, one thing to understand here, this is not true form Barbados. That's not his actual form. That's just how he looks, or at least when he took control of Batman, and Batman operating as a servant of Barbados. For Barbados himself, we don't really see his true form here, right? I mean, you kind of do. He's almost kind of ethereal to a degree, right? He's almost like this godlike entity that exists out there, more of a concept than anything else at this point, because what it looks like has happened over the course of the Dark Multiverse is that Barbados has kind of channeled himself, one, directly into Bruce Wayne on Earth Zero, really kind of as a prime thing, right? Saying like, you know, I rule this area, but two, his influence is spread out throughout the rest of the Dark Multiverse as well. So seemingly he's split himself into portions. It's kind of what it looks like. We're not directly told that. That's kind of one of the issues you run into, is there's a lot that's just not really explained here. But, you know, for his part, where he tries to go against these dragons, he's overcome pretty fast, right? I mean, he's donning this monitor armor, right? So it's multiversal armor, basically armor of gods, and it is really powerful, but there really isn't a whole lot he can do against these guys because he doesn't know how to really wield the armor the way that he's supposed to. And so because of that, what you end up having is Superman, you know, this Dark Multiverse Superman that initially intends to consume him, and then in the process, he actually ends up breaking off one of his teeth and is ultimately saved by Dick Grayson. That Dick Grayson on Earth Zero in the Dark Multiverse is still alive, but he's only one of a ragtag group of people who basically have. Now, what he has here is what's called the Parallax, which I think is cool. It's basically like a rock metal, like a hard rock guitar axe. It looks cool, it looks amazing, but it's also infused with the remaining power rings from the other lanterns who were there. But the reason why this matters is because using the axe, what it does is it allows itself to modify based on vibrational frequencies, right? So using this axe, Dick Grayson could potentially leave this universe, but for what it does, it allows him to kind of temporarily overcome these dragons, sort of push them back, knock them out for a couple minutes, buy them some time, and basically allow them to get out of there. Now, one of the things we also learn here is that there's no love lost between Duke Thomas and Nightwing. And the reason why is because when the invasion initially happened, when Barbados and his forces initially showed up here, that what you ended up having was Duke Thomas, who stole the monitor armor and then took off into the multiverse, trying to find a way to save what other worlds were out there. And so in the eyes of Dick Grayson, he abandoned them in their time of need, right? And so there's not really a lot of, hey man, you know, it's good to see you. It's him just being like, do what you always do, like, you know, Duke, just run, right? It's the only thing that you're really good at, right? And so because of that, what ends up happening is that Dick Grayson ends up traveling back to his base of operations. He ends up going through all these crazy things too, something called the Plastic Force, which is basically Plastic Man just kind of spread all over the place, right? You've got like the Oblivion Bar, right? So where you end up having like, you know, John Constantine and all those guys drinking and that sort of stuff. But he ends up following him back to his main base of operations, which is the Justice League Watchtower, which of course has since crashed into Earth, and is basically where him and like Kendra, basically, you know, Hawkgirl, where they all basically exist, right? They just kind of live there and try to ride out their days as best they can and just sort of survive. Hawkman in his giant hawk form is basically here, right? He's in this location. But things are kind of wild because as this goes on and as they go and talk to Bobo, the talking monkey, or, you know, Detective Chimp, basically, he's got the Red Tornado armor. So Red Tornado was kind of like Vision before Vision, I think. But the whole point is like, you brought somebody back, right? Somebody followed you. And that's when they realize that Duke Thomas is there. Now, when they realize he's there, he's immediately set upon by the Flash. Now, this is kind of an interesting depiction of Barry Allen, or at least we assume it's Barry Allen. We're not really given an explanation whether it's Barry or Wally, but he's kind of like in this robotic, you know, skeletal form. We don't really know how this guy functions the way that he does, right? We're not really given any information on him. He's just kind of there and he's basically a speedster, and that is essentially it. But Duke Thomas actually pitches this idea that they can win. Now, here's why Duke Thomas is so important in this story. And it's one of the things that DC never really explored in the main DC universe, which I never really understood why. Like, it was literally Scott Snyder who set DC Comics up for like, hey, let's explore Signal, and then they never did, right? He just kind of fell to the wayside, became a secondary or a tertiary character, and that was it, right? It was just, there was nothing else with him besides that. But one of the things that made Duke so significant was the fact that he had almost this endless supply of hope. He always believed that things could get better. The irony behind all this is that used to be Nightwing, right? Nightwing was always considered the best of all the heroes on Earth because he was the guy who always saw good in people. No matter how bad they got, no matter how twisted things were, he always managed to find a way to see the good in things, right? Duke Thomas doesn't really, I mean, he has that element, but it's really kind of being shined on more here because of the fact that Nightwing lost it, right? That Nightwing doesn't have it anymore. You know, he basically seems to have lost faith in the ability for the world to become better or to like save the world from Barbados, destroy the dragons or anything like that. But as Duke kind of pitches this, and in the face of all this hope that he has, that when you had Barbados, who basically conquered the Dark Multiverse and actually intended to go after the source, that now it's like, okay, maybe he does have a point here, right? I mean, the death wave is already on its way. Even if we defeat Barbados, we're not going to be able to stop it, right? So like the universe is going to end anyway. There's nothing we can do about it. So if we are going to die, then why go out as scavengers, right? People just trying to live from one day to the next and trying to survive. Why not go out with a bang, right? Like, why not just go out and just destroy whatever forces of Barbados that we can? Now, here's the thing that Dick Grayson points out. He basically tells Duke, if we're going to do that, if we're going to kill dragons, we need dragons of our own. Now, switch over to the Batman Who Laughs. Now, I know. We're all exhausted and tired of the Batman Who Laughs. He was probably one of the coolest characters that DC screwed up, right? It was just overexposure. Like, everything was the Batman Who Laughs. He's a perfect example of what happens when a comic book publisher comes across a really cool idea and then just hammers it into the ground, right? Just totally destroys any interest or desire that people have in seeing any more of the character. The cool thing about this is we get him for like a moment, right? It's not some great big huge drawn out thing. It's really more him being here as like a plot device because he's got one of the Joker dragons under his control. Now, for the most part, he just kind of looks at it and considers it to be nonsensical and it's like, you're not funny, you're not really interesting, you were supposed to be great and interesting, but you're not. And then it basically has been giving him a hard time all this time, right? Just ridiculing this dragon all this time. Now, he does end up picking up on the fact that the superheroes are on their way there, right? They're like Dick Grayson, Signal, all those guys are on their way there. He basically takes the hand of Zatanna, which he uses as a trophy, and then uses her magic to essentially force them down, right? To bring them crashing down. And then ultimately ends up trying to subdue all of them, right? Like trying to take them all over. And for the most part, it's all just a ruse and a distraction. That where you end up having him subduing Barry Allen or whichever version of the Flash it is, where he takes out like, Beppo, the super monkey, where he ends up taking out Detective Chimp, where he's got Hawkgirl and so on, that this is all designed to be a kind of ruse where it allows Nightwing to basically sneak in and then cut the chains around the dragon, which in turn incinerates the Batman Who Laughs. This is how you do Batman Who Laughs in a story, not insofar as killing him, but having him there for a moment or two, and then he goes on and does his own thing, right? Like that's the way that you do the Batman Who Laughs. You don't make 10 stories over the course of a single year revolve around that one character. That's how you kill interest in your character. But the important thing is that this dragon really kind of has a personality of its own, and it's something that we never really knew that he had. That what you end up having is Duke Thomas walking up to this guy and saying, look, here's what's going to happen. You got 3 choices. 1, you can kill me and then they'll all kill you. 2, you can fly away and then Barbados will kill you anyway because you killed the Batman Who Laughs, you killed one of his enemies. Or 3, you can join us and there's a high likelihood we'll die, but at least we can destroy some of his forces in the process. And ultimately, like, Joker Dragon is like, deal. So like literally they all end up boarding the dragon. They jump on this dragon and go flying into these forces of Barbados, right? Go flying in against these guys. Now, they're all each prepared for each one of these battles, right? So you've got the Flash who goes flying in, who goes just literally running on top of the dragon, building up some momentum, goes running into the Hal Jordan dragon, and then snatches the ring off of his hand, right? Like literally snatches his hand out, which basically destroys both the Flash, but it also kills the dragon form in the process. Now, it is one of these things where like the essence of his character still lives there. So presumably the soul of Hal Jordan, I guess, still resides inside his ring, enough that the Flash can kind of communicate with him to a degree and basically help him move on to the afterlife, so to speak. So I guess you can largely say this version of the Flash is like the Black Racer, right? You could very well make that connection here. But the takeaway from this is that the Flash dies, right? The Flash is the first one to fall. Following that, you've got Detective Chimp, and then you also end up having Hawkgirl and Hawkman who essentially fall. Now, Detective Chimp does it in an interesting way where he basically lassos the Wonder Woman dragon and says like, it's time for you to face what it is that you've become. Now, because she is a Medusa, it also ends up, infecting Detective Chimp. He turns to stone alongside his suit, and then of course he's destroyed that way, but so is Wonder Woman. She's destroyed by being forced to, be exposed to her own little tendrils, snakeheads, that kind of thing. Now for Aquaman, who's like this giant Aquaman dragon, it looks like it's just kind of like something akin to self-detonation, right? Is more or less what it looks like. But the long and short is that each one of these guys die so that the only ones really left alive are the Superman dragon and then Nightwing and Signal. And so with Nightwing really pulling the strings here, what you have here is like Superman, using his heat vision, right, to try to take out Nightwing as best he can. It doesn't really work. And while he is talking a little bit of smack, he's like, you were basically always a poor man's Batman anyway, that kind of a thing. That actually what he ends up doing is drawing out this kryptonite pit. And he actually got this from when they first encountered the Batman Who Laughs here a few minutes ago, right? That Nightwing, it kind of snuck along the different trophies that the Batman Who Laughs had, and then located a piece, like a little shard of green kryptonite, and then used that shard of green kryptonite to destroy this version of Superman. It's a genius idea. It's a really cool idea. Of course, he uses the parallax to do it, right? I mean, I really hope the DC sells this in some form because I would buy it. Somebody's going to make a version of it on Etsy or something like that. But but like I would buy it. But the funny thing is that Superman is still in there. And ultimately he ends up thanking Dick Grayson for the fact that he basically kills him and spares him this existence, which really is a fate worse than death. And so the last person standing here, right? The last one standing here is basically Signal and Barbados, right? Like Signal and Barbados, these two just going toe to toe. Now, as they fight, it is an interesting thing because now it does kind of lend credence to the idea that it really is just Barbados, right? But we'll actually find out there's a little more to it than that. That the big takeaway is that using his ability to jump from location to location based on the monitor armor, the monitor suit, that what he actually ends up doing is teleporting inside of this giant bat dragon, locating Bruce Wayne. And when he locates Bruce Wayne, he basically removes him from being harnessed, being tied up inside of Barbados, which is how he's using him as a giant dragon. And then once that's done, he kills Bruce Wayne. Right now, killing Bruce Wayne is significant here. And the reason why is because if you guys remember the original Dark Knight's Metal event, Bruce Wayne himself was a vessel for Barbados, right? As long as Bruce Wayne was alive, that Barbados could use him to enter into the positive multiverse, to effectively possess him. And that's what happened here, right? That element still remains the same. That Barbados actually successfully managed to possess Batman, and then in turn used him as a means to conquer the rest of the Dark Multiverse. And so because of that, once this version of Batman is dead, Barbados is just kind of, seemingly his essence is non-existent anymore. Again, we're not given a definitive explanation here. I mean, it basically does look like Barbados is essentially dead, but if Barbados existed inside the Dark Multiverse and then he possessed Bruce Wayne, and then ultimately Bruce Wayne was killed, wouldn't that lend credence to the idea that Barbados's essence would still be alive? The answer to that question comes in the form of the fact that once Signal basically uses the parallax to cut through the body of Barbados and then fashion a suit out of it, that two things take place. The first is he becomes what's called the Dark Knight, right? This is basically a version of Batman who can travel from universe to universe and is also in possession of monitor technology, monitor armor, or really kind of a new form of armor created out of Barbados, which makes him insanely powerful, right? This is basically a god tier Batman. The second thing that happens is that because the entirety of the Dark Multiverse's existence is the result of all the worst nightmares and the worst possibilities of everybody in the positive multiverse, the Dark Multiverse will effectively be reborn. As soon as it's destroyed, with the death wave kind of spilling over and wiping everything out, that as people begin to dream up and to have fears based on terrible versions of themselves, superheroes, supervillains, things like that, the Dark Multiverse will start to take form again. That what Signal does is he enters into kind of this void, right? What's left of the Dark Multiverse, this kind of big, empty, vast space. And then he ends up meeting Tempest Fudgenon, right? This guy who's basically the watcher of the Dark Multiverse, the one that we kind of follow around, and he shows us these various events and different things like that. And Duke's like, so wait a minute, let me understand this. All these worlds were dying, all these terrible things were happening, and you were just watching? So he just punches the crap out of Tempest Fudgenon and then goes forward as the final knight, right? This guy who intends to essentially travel through the Dark Multiverse and destroy all these really dark versions, right? These really twisted characters that'll pop up as time goes on. Now, the big takeaway from this, and the reason why I love this story and the reason why it's so cool, is because what it does is it gives DC the ability to write a series of stories based around this final knight that travels from universe to universe, world to world, facing off against Dark Multiverse versions of heroes that we know from the main DC universe. It basically leaves it open-ended. You could launch an entire publishing initiative based on this, just a single line of comics out there, and all it does is explore Duke Thomas and all the terrible possibilities that exist in the Dark Multiverse. It's a great idea. Whether or not it's an idea that'll come to fruition or even be done well is something only time will tell. But I'm excited about it, right? I think it's a really, really cool concept. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.